What if the version of you've been chasing is actually the one you've been trying to return to all along? The one before the noise, before the burnout, before you started shrinking to fit a life that never really fit you. This isn't about starting over. It's about returning. Returning to your soul, returning to your truth, the version of you that has always been meant to be. Each week, we're going to offer up real stories, hard-earned wisdom, and practical tools from powerful returns to help you reconnect with who you are and why you're here. I'm your host, Bryan White, and this is The Return Project. Welcome back to another incredible episode. Today, we have the honor of sitting down with Dr. LaShawn. She's also known as the Global Strategist. We'll dive into how she developed that. She's also released a recent memoir, The D.I.V.A herself, I Survived My Mess, something I'm really excited to dive into. She has a background and a story that she'll walk us through, and personally, it's going to astonish you how people can transform their lives and where it takes them. So Dr. LaShawn, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Bryan, for having me here on the Return Project podcast. I'm excited to be with you on today.
I would love to dive right into the deep end of this. And let's just start off with share with our audience where you started from and how you dove into the world that you're living today, how you wrote your latest memoir, how you gained the name The Global Strategist, and how it all became.
Well, okay, that's quite a bit. So I don't mind sharing a little bit about the journey that I've been on. You know, every time I do one of these interviews, I go back and listen to it and I'm like, I find more and more things that, hey, I need to talk about. So again, thank you for having me. So I've always been known for all of these titles: educator, leader, entrepreneur, strategist, just all these different things. And so before I was the global strategist, I was a woman who was silently breaking, if you will, under the weight of betrayal, burnout, and expectations, right? And so you really don't know what that looks like until you kind of get over the hump and you're in a different position. And then you realize all of the things that you've journeyed through. You know, I had mastered, if you will, the art of, performing strength, showing up for everyone else, while obviously I'm slowly losing myself while I'm performing for everyone else. But it wasn't until I hit this emotional rock bottom, if you will, that I realized survival is not the same as healing, right? And in that breaking point, I knew when my relationship grew with God that He had revealed to me that, all the mess that I was dealing with is my ministry. And so it was from that moment that everything changed, and I began, telling my story, telling the truth, first to myself, obviously, but to others in any gracing platform that I had to this journey of getting to the book. Well, let me go here. So I did all the right things, right? I got the degrees. I climbed the ladder in education. I became a leader. I was a young mom, and I was, like I was saying, I was the woman that everyone could depend on. So when you get to those points, you think, okay, life is good. I'm moving. Everything is happening. But, when I was saying behind those scenes, there was a lot of this suffering. And so when I'm dealing with betrayal and burnout and heartbreak and all of those things, I'm smiling through it all, even when, I'm like, okay, I know there are people depending on me. And so I didn't feel seen and I didn't feel whole. And so, at this point, I began journaling. Again, I think about when I was young and I would write in my diaries, and who would have thought, like, at an older age, it's really considering journaling. And so after going through therapy, having different therapists on my team, letting go of this version of me that was built on survival, if you will, that's where I was able to birth this book, The D.I.V.A herself. And now I help women do the same. So women who are entrusted to me, whether it's listening to a podcast or going to speak at an event, or like I said, women or men who may pick up the book and read the book. I tell this journey of all those different things and how I got out of it and how now I'm successfully running these multiple business speaking and coaching and all these different things that I do. And so I really got here by trusting God. Like, hey, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And really doing the work and, refusing to let my pain, if you will, be the final word in my story.
Dive right into the depths of the darkness and start with, where did you see your self-value and your self-love? And what were the beliefs that you were kind of holding on to in that period of darkness and diving into burnout? Because I can very much so relate, and I would love to know your perspective on it from being in what sounds like a very similar position where you said you were starting to lose yourself. I'd love to expand upon that and find out more about how you felt like you were losing yourself and kind of what you were holding on to in that period.
Sure. So just kind of listening, I was thinking about some initial thoughts, if you will, in the darkness before this breakdown, if you will, before this burnout that I knew was kind of like the end of the tightrope. I saw my value in what I did, right? Like what I did for others, what I did to just kind of achieve these goals, but not in who I was. And there's a big difference for those who are listening there. When you see value in what you did, it's great. You get the accolades, the praise, all those different things, but you don't see the value in who you are. So I was tied, Brian, to my self-worth, if you will, to my performance, my productivity, my ability to just hold it all together. I thought by being needed in various capacities, to assist others or to be there for others, that was the same as being loved, right? So I knew I didn't truly love myself. I tolerated myself, and there was a big difference. And I celebrated, these achievements, but I ignored like this aching pain that I just deep down really didn't know what it was. And I held this belief like, if I can just do enough, be enough, fix enough, maybe I'll finally be enough for someone to choose me, see me, or stay. That was kind of how I operated. And that belief, to really get to the answer of your question, that belief that drove me until it drained me. And so I was showing up, if you will, for everyone but myself. I didn't know, how to rest. I didn't know how to say no without guilt. And I confused, if you will, being that strong with that being silent. And so it really wasn't until I lost control emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all those different things, that I realized my value didn't come from what I could give others. It came from who God said I was before I ever just like lifted a finger. So that's when everything for me started to shift, from performing love to actually receiving it, from self neglect to self honor. And then that, if you will, from surviving to becoming, who I am.
I'm sitting here nodding my head because I relate to this 100%.
Absolutely.
I would love to know, what was your awakening moment? What was that moment that shook you to your core that said, I can't do this anymore?
Wow. Think, I when I answer this question, it really it hits home for me, because every time I think back to some of those moments, it's like new revelation comes through. But my awakening moment, the one that shook me to the core, was when I seriously attempted, which was that time, the third attempt to take my life. At that point, I was really exhausted. I was, emotionally broken. And by then I was just empty. And I was doing everything, like I said, for everyone. And I carried this weight that I was never meant to hold. And I kept saying, like, if I disappear, would anybody notice beyond what I do for them? And I'll never forget the night that I, attempted to do what I thought I was going to do. I ended up waking up in the middle of the night, traveling about 30 miles from home, drove myself, ended up at a grocery store in the middle of the night. No identification. I was in my pajamas. No one who knew who I was. And I ran into the store. And I'm not quite sure at the time because I was out of it. But I woke up in the hospital, and I remember this cut on my foot. But I remember this moment of kind of traveling in time, as if I passed away, as if I died. And I was able to come in this space, if you will, and see God. It was like a supernatural moment. And so that moment, it wasn't just about the pain that I was dealing with, but it was this invisibility, if you will. And because I knew I was dealing with this feeling unseen, unheard, I knew that there was something that I needed to do. Like there's a reason I'm supposed to be there. And so for me, it wrecked me, but it wrecked me in the most redemptive way because it was just like, LaShawn, you can't keep going through these moments of feeling like you're invalid. You can't be here. You don't have a space. And so it was in that moment of complete collapse, if you will, that I finally surrendered. And that surrender, it became my survival. I got the help that I needed. I went through all the different things, belonging to communities, therapy, journaling, reading, going to classes. And then I picked up the pen and I started writing my memoir. And then that's when I realized I was really showing up for the real me. I was learning to say no. I was learning to get past this. I have to be there for everyone else. And so that moment was terrifying for me, but it was also the beginning of my return. And now I speak to remind women, hey, you're not disposable. You're not defined by your lowest moment. But it's like, okay, you've gone through this. Yeah, 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 yeah. We've gone through all of that. But at the same time, it's like, it's for someone else because now we can speak to those things that we've gone through, whatever that may be, because there's someone that's listening to you when you're speaking, when you're doing your podcast or whatever it is that you're doing. Someone's learning from what it is that you've done, and they're key to their survival in their journey.
Had you always had such a powerful faith? Was your spirituality and faith something that you grew up with, or had this changed as you changed?
I'll say this during my life, it was a lot of performing. I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up where it was important to go to church. I watched my grandmother, if you will, with an active prayer life. I did all of those different things. But when I look back, all of that was, yeah, I was raised in church. So, yeah, faith was around me. It was there. I knew how to go to church. I knew how to sing the songs. I know how to say the prayers and show up polished. I mean, that was all part of I'm all great. Everything's good. But growing up, I look at it now that my faith was more tradition than transformation. I mean, it was just what I knew, what I was taught. And it was something I respected, but I hadn't yet experienced it for myself. And it wasn't until life broke me that faith really became real when everything I depended on fell apart, relationships and titles, my own strength. That's when I stopped rehearsing that faith and really started living it. And so I had to kind of unlearn that performing, if you will, and I had to learn how to simply live it, how to simply be with God and understand what it is that I'm called to do. And that's when my relationship and things changed and it shifted. So no, I didn't always walk in faith, but faith was always walked with me. But now I live it every day and I display it as much as I can each day. This is so relatable for me as I grew up a little bit like yourself. Yeah.
I went to church.
Yeah.
I did all the right things. We could say the prayers, we could sing the songs.
Yeah.
But it was all a show.
Yeah,
I didn't
absolutely.
have a real connection. I didn't have that living in it. I was there and I was doing it.
Yeah.
We were making it look good.
Yeah.
And then there comes a time when we now live it. Something shifts in us and we embrace it and realize that for anybody out there listening, whatever it is you believe, whether you believe in God, spirituality, anything that you believe in, truly to the core of me, I believe that there has to be a shift where you go from showing it and being it to living it.
Absolutely.
Did you find that as you you had your crumble moment and all of a sudden you realize enough was enough and it's time to start making these changes? What was one of the first steps you took? What was the very first piece that you realized had to change?
I think for me, what had to really change is loving myself first. That was the most important thing. Like, even though I knew I may not have had this, that, or I'm comparing myself to other people and I realized I didn't have those things, I had to begin to love myself. And how I did that, the first step was to really tell the truth, right? Not to the world, but to myself. I had to admit that I was not okay. I had to accept that I was tired of comparing myself to others, that I was bleeding emotionally while calling it, strength, if you will. And I had to stop hiding behind who I wanted to be or who I thought I should be, move in a place where I know that I'm supposed to be once I learn to love myself and heal. And what for me, that was really shifting my mindset. I had to stop believing that my value came from being needed. It took me a very long time to really understand that. I had to stop performing for love and start receiving it, especially from God. And I had to shift from this, survival mode. Once I did that, to surrender so that I could begin to love myself and really understand, the value, as you asked the question earlier about really valuing myself and loving myself.
As you're starting to make this transformation and diving into really learning to love yourself, how important was the ability to give forgiveness to yourself and others, learn grace and gratitude?
Wow. It took me a while. I talk about in my book my parents' divorce, and I talk about my mother's drug use, that my parents ended up divorcing. And I didn't realize I held a lot of that resentment for 20 something years. I didn't really understand that, you hold on to things. So I'm the fixer, right? Part of this global strategist is I fix the problems. And I've always been the fixer of everything. And so when I cannot fix things or I can't make things right, I've always held on to things like, it's my fault, or I couldn't put it together, or I couldn't make it happen. So for me, forgiveness was everything. For others, yeah, but especially for myself. And I had to forgive myself for, staying too long, for ignoring red flags, for the times I silenced my own voice to keep the peace. That was the hardest part, like looking in the mirror and saying, hey, you didn't know then what you know now, and that's okay. Like, I had to tell myself that forgiving me, was so important, because if you don't forgive yourself, how do you heal? Right. And so when I think about this grace, grace became my oxygen. I had to learn how to extend to myself what I so easily, if you will, gave to others. God didn't require this perfection. So where did I get this perfection from? Where did I come from? Right? We're not supposed to be perfect, but he requires honesty, transparency, integrity, all those things. And every time I fell apart, I felt like he met me with grace and not this guilt. And so gratitude came when I started seeing, the beauty in the brokenness, when I realized that even in, the darkest moments, God was still, working. And so gratitude reminded me I didn't just survive, but I grew and I healed and I became, literally in that order. I grew, I healed, and I became. So now I walk in forgiveness and I give grace freely. It's easier because I'm not holding on to anything that's going to take me out of here. Right. And with that, it allows me to lead with gratitude, because every part of my story obviously has a purpose.
Know if you ever fell into the space such as myself, and something that I had to really work on was my consistency in the journey of growing and developing that self-love and changing some habits and reforming some beliefs. How did you keep your consistency? How did you not fall back into some comfortability, or how did you manage to keep pushing forward when life, as we all know, pushes back and it's not always easy to go forward? We can get comfortable, and
hmm
consistency is hard.
Yes, it is. Yeah, let me be real. Consistency, it was hard. It is hard. It's hard today. I didn't wake up every day feeling healed. I didn't wake up every day feeling, inspired or hopeful, or like, oh, I want to get on a podcast and share my journey. There were days that I wanted to quit. I wanted to quit on the book. I wanted to quit on therapy. I wanted to quit in the community circles, that I was getting myself involved in. I wanted to quit the process. I wanted to quit myself. But what kept me going, it wasn't motivation, it was commitment. And I've always been committed to something, but it was kind of like I watched my commitment reverse. I made a decision that I can't keep living, broken and calling it normal, right? Like, it just didn't make any sense. So even when I didn't feel it, I showed up, tired, crying, scared. And so, you know, I showed up though. That was the consistent part. I wasn't healed. Everything wasn't great. I created these routines that protected my peace. I was talking about like the journaling, creating these boundaries earlier, but I cut off what drained me. And then I leaned into what fed me. And so I was surrounded myself with people who held me accountable. And I think that's very important when you bring up consistency, not just to my goals, but it was like to, my growth. And I say this that again, going back to the question you asked me before, I gave myself most of all grace because some days were ugly. Some days I wasn't feeling like, oh, I'm healing. I'm going through a process, but I kept choosing me. I kept choosing healing. I kept choosing purpose. And that was the consistency. It didn't mean perfection though, Bryan, but it meant I didn't stop even when it got messy.
Hmm?
Yeah.
There are so many days, I'm going to be very frank, where I sat on the floor and cried.
Yeah.
There were days where I was just an ugly, hot mess, but I got back up. And that's okay. What I always want people to know is that in your journey of self-love, rediscovery, whatever you're going through, you're going to have the hard days where you might be on the floor crying.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
we get back up.
Right. That's true. And it's not easy. It's not easy.
It's not easy. So we are never going to sugarcoat it. Ever will I ever sugarcoat that any of this journey that anybody walks through.
Absolutely.
Not easy.
Absolutely. That's true.
But what I do find is when you choose to do the not easy things, what doors seem to come flying open and opportunities seem to come changing in your life. I'd be really curious to know, as you started to really set new boundaries, create new beliefs, and build your self-love, what doors opened for you? What opportunities did you start to see that you may have missed before?
I think for me, so I'll say this, writing a book, telling my story, speaking on podcasts, talking publicly, sharing my testimony, never in a million years. None of this stuff would ever had become public and those kinds of things. I just wouldn't. I would never have sought these opportunities. When I stopped, choosing the easy way, the pretending, the performing, the pleasing, I made room for the right things, right? No more validation. So easy would have been staying silent. Easy would have been staying stuck. But then when I said yes to healing, yes to the truth, yes to me, it was like doors started opening that I didn't even know existed. God began aligning me with opportunities that attached me to the women I was becoming, not the version I used to be. So then I was getting speaking engagements, speaking invitations, coaching women, business partnerships, the book. Obviously, it came after I stopped shrinking and starting showing up whole, if you will. And so I found my voice. I found my audience. I found women who were waiting for the version of me that had survived, that had survived something. Saying no to the easy thing gave me access to my authentic life. And let me tell you, it's so much better than the one that I was faking, obviously.
Do you have a belief that all things happen in a particular time for a particular reason?
Absolutely. We don't know what life is going to bring us when we're born and when we die. There's two things we're guaranteed: to be born and to die. And you don't know whether you're alive for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years. You don't know the life battles that you go through. So without a doubt, yes, I believe that everything, the good, the bad, the heartbreaking, the confusing, it serves a purpose in God's perfect timing. You have to go to you got to go through certain things to show the grit that you can get through these things, that you can, stand up in front of a crowd. I tell people, when you give a story, you tell your story, you tell your testimony, that's when you have to battle a lot of negativity. People are talking about you behind your back, or people are sharing false stories, or whatever it may be. And you got to know how to handle that, right? But to press through your own journey and how to get to things is how you get the strength to be able to say, I'm not going to let negativity keep me from my calling. I didn't always understand it in the moment, that some seasons felt unfair, like some, pain felt like pointless, if you will. But looking back, I see how, you know, everything was used as a single piece, if you will, the betrayal, the burnout, the breakdown that I was talking about earlier to build who I am today. So what I thought, you know, was delay, it was actually development. What felt like rejection was really a redirection, if you will. And what looked like the end was really the birthing place of my purpose. So, yes, you know, I fully believe all things happen in a time for a reason. We don't like it sometimes when it happens, right? Or we don't like how long it takes to get through the process, but not by accident, but by divine appointment. And I trust that, you know, the way that my life is going, nothing is ever too late. Everything is just right on time and it falls into place, even when life feels like, why am I here? What purposes am I serving?
Want to pull a piece out of what you just said to make sure I heard that right. If I heard that right, you just said that delay was direction.
Yes. Delay was direction.
Love it. Like, delay was direction. For anybody that's sitting out there feeling like they're in a delay, they're not moving forward, and it's, let's just reframe that to exactly what you just said. Delay is direction.
Delay is definitely direction. You know, we say, you know, we want to get married by a certain time. We want to buy a house. We want to do this. We want to do that. And we're going to do it by 20. We're going to do it by 30. You know, when I say that this delay was direction, I mean the seasons where it felt like nothing was happening. When I was waiting, when I was overlooked, the doors kept closing. People were saying no to this, no to that. They were actually God's way of protecting me and redirecting me to something better. I didn't know what something better was going to look like because to me, what could possibly be better than what I was denied? I used to see delay as punishment. I'd ask, why not me? Why not now? But now I know God was positioning me. He was building my character, deepening my faith, and rerouting me away from what looked good but wasn't Him. So the delay, it taught me patience. It taught me, you know, trusting this timing over talent, if you will. And I proved that closed doors don't mean rejection. They just mean redirection. We get hurt when things don't go our way, but it's really just, no, this is not the path you're going to take, or this is not the timing. So when something doesn't move for me as fast as I wanted to, you know, sometimes I'm like, but I don't panic. I pause because I know delay might just be His way of saying, I've got something greater on the other side.
Do you ever wish that you could go back and tell a massive amount of this wisdom and these insights to a younger you? If you had the ability to share one of the greatest pieces of wisdom with a younger you, what would that be?
She that's an interesting question. I've never thought about that before. Wow. What, you know, I wish I could go back and look that younger LaShawn in her eyes, the one who was tired but kept going, the one who smiled when she was really hurting. I would tell her, you know, you don't have to prove your worth, LaShawn. You're already enough. You don't have to chase love. You don't have to shrink to be accepted or carry what was never yours. You know, you're going to make it through this, whatever it is. And don't dim your light trying to, you know, be someone else's comfort, if you will. But since I can't go back, I wrote that book. That would definitely be some of the wisdom that I would give to a younger me.
Exactly where I wanted to dive us into next is your book that you wrote. Tell me how you essentially got that done. How did you manage? Because I know for myself, with my book that I've just released, I can very much so relate that writing a book, again, we go back to, is not the easiest thing that it might look like. You have to be consistent. You have to have the passion through it, and it takes a lot. But what was your driving factor, and where has this book developed into? What is it growing into?
You know, that's okay. Let me start. Let me start in order of what you asked me. It took me 7 years to write this book. I started, I stopped, I deleted, I'm not doing it, sat on it for 2 years. Nobody's going to read it. It was a process of deliverance for me. I didn't write it all at once. I wrote, you know, between work over those 7 years, between motherhood, moments of grief, Some days I poured out words with passion, but then I didn't pick it up for months because a lot of things that I had to relive, that was a lot of grief. Other days, I would just be like, this ain't happening. But what kept me going was this deep conviction. There's a woman out there who needs to know she's not alone in her mess. That was what I had to keep telling myself. So going to consistency was hard, but I made a commitment. I created this sacred space, mornings, late nights, stolen weekends. And I just wrote as much as I could. Even if it was one sentence, there were times where I had one sentence. I had a title and I would look at the page like, I don't know what to say. The passion, it came from this pain. I had lived these pages. I had buried pieces of myself in silence, Bryan, for years. And this wasn't about publishing. It was about freeing myself and creating this path that I knew that other women could do the same. The driving factor was obedience because God told me your survival wasn't just for you. So I couldn't rest until I knew the book was finished. When I got real serious about it, maybe like in year 6. And now this book for me, it's developing into a movement. It's not just a memoir, but it's a mirror for anybody who reads it. I always say it's for women, but I've had men who have said, hey, I read your book, and they're spitting stuff out to me. But people who read it, it's a mirror to try to find their identity after brokenness. Like it's open doors for me, to go speak, to do podcasts, to do retreats, all these different things. But knowing that, wow, someone is saying, hey, this book did this for me. And knowing that it's touched people from all over, all walks of life, who are finally finding the language for their pain and the courage to heal. So, it's definitely not what I expected, but it's definitely a journey that I'm so glad that I'm on.
Do you have a favorite chapter or a favorite portion of the book that you wrote? Is there anything in that book that it would be the first thing you would tell someone they need to read that piece?
I think for me, will it be I think when I think about the book, well, I'll say this, dressed up, the part where I go into being dressed up but broken, that's what the chapter that I really got raw in, like chapter 5, I think it was. It's the moment where I peeled back like every layer. And even when I'm reading it, I'm like, and I peeled back the titles, the lashes, the polished exterior, and I really told the truth about what it looks like to function while I was looking fabulous. It's the chapter where I was the strong friend, the woman who had it all together, but I was silently unraveling. I'm dealing with, I want to take my life, but no one would ever know that was me. And it was also the turning point where survival began to meet the surrender. And I finally gave myself this permission to say, you got to get this healed. You got to get healed. And so if you were picking up the book, if a listener was picking up my book for the first time, I'd say start there, because once you realize that you're not alone in that performance, we can talk about healing for real. That chapter is where the mask comes off. And that's when the real freedom, if you will, begins.
So you've written your memoir and you're out there sharing it with people. What's next? Do you have any extra projects going? What is the next goal? What is the next thing in line you've got going?
I don't know. I'm on this journey. I'm releasing companion books and journals that actually have a couple of journals coming out next week. And someone actually asked me just the other day, and I said, through my nonprofit, I do want to launch the D.I.V.A herself healing experience, where I'm doing like more live workshops. I do an annual conference every year called the Wonder Woman Conference, but I really want to do something a little bit more intimate, where there are retreats where women can come together and lay their burdens down and walk away with clarity, strategy, and community. Because I'm also about building multiple incomes. I'm really the proponent of championing people like, hey, you got to be doing different things. If it's your passion, you could get paid for it. So with the companion journal, as I was kind of piling it was guiding me through, okay, what's next? And so I want to build these programs, this online content for women in transition, whether they're stepping out of survival mode, they're starting over, or they're trying to rediscover their voice. This is the work that I do in my nonprofit. But now I want to know, what is it to work with these women one-on-one and side by side to help them to rediscover their voice after loss. So for me, I'm on this journey and I know that I'm called to restore women to wholeness. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, like me, but I know that I'm committed to being the guide on that journey for everybody that I'm able to touch.
So this seems like a great place to bring our conversation full circle. And at the end of every one of my podcasts, I like to pose a really powerful question. So, Dr. LaShawn, what is your definition of truly living your best life?
My best life? That's a good question. I think first and foremost, walking and living your purpose is really living your best life. Where for me, it's about alignment, but not exhaustion. So it's not about having it all together and being okay with it and checking and not checking every box. It's about peace, purpose, and presence. Those are three. Being present in now and not so worried about tomorrow is very important to me. It's waking up and knowing I'm walking in what I'm called to do every day now, not just what I'm expected to do. So it's now having best life is having these boundaries and not burnout. It's laughing freely. It's loving deeply and not apologizing for resting or healing. It's serving others without losing myself. It's no longer needing to be an on all the time, just being authentic. So if I can't do it, I can't be present, but I need to do self-awareness, then I need to go do self-awareness. So living my best life means I'm no longer chasing perfection. I'm embracing wholeness. And that for me is freedom.
Absolutely beautifully said. I have loved every word of it. There is so much in there that I'm sitting here the whole time. I'm just nodding my head because I relate to this so much. I know that there are going to be people out there that hear this today and they're going to be sitting there through this whole conversation, nodding their head along.
Yeah.
Dr. LaShawn, it's been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few moments with you on the Return Project podcast. It's been a pleasure.
That's a wrap on today's episode. A heartfelt thank you to our guests for showing up with honesty, depth, and wisdom. And thank you for listening in. I hope something in this conversation stirred something in you, a memory, a reminder, or maybe even a return to a part of yourself that's been waiting. If you enjoyed this episode, can I ask a quick 30-second favor? Share it with someone you know, someone who might need to hear this message too. And don't forget to explore past episodes. There's so much more waiting for you there. Until next time, I'm your host, Bryan White, and this is The Return Project.